Hi, I'm Galit Kaunitz,
And I'm Jackie Wilson, and you're listening to Double Reed Dish,
a podcast for oboists, bassoonists,
and the people who love them. As our field increasingly needs us to be more creative, more innovative, and more effective, a career in music can be approached in a lot of different ways. In our bonus episode series, Mavericks, we bring you the voices of some of the Double Reed community's biggest trailblazers, each forging their musical path in their own unique way. For this Mavericks episode, we welcome oboist Dan Schwartz, Assistant Professor of Oboe at the University of Oklahoma. Dan, welcome.
Thank you for having me.
Can we start off by having you talk to us about who you are and what you do?
Sure. So I am Dan Schwartz, like you said, the Assistant Professor of Oboe at the University of Oklahoma. I'm also the second oboe English horn player in the Oklahoma City Philharmonic. And I'm just kind of a lover of oboe and a lover of teaching and a lover of making music. And I never thought I would end up here. I started college as a philosophy major. I was planning to be a lawyer, and sort of fell in love with music along the way. And a little bit later in life, I always consider myself a very late bloomer with music. I started college on a, $1,800 plastic oboe, so very late bloomer when people are coming in with, $9,000 instruments. But yeah, that's a little bit about kind of me and what I'm doing currently.
Would you talk to us a little bit about your compositional journey? I mean, you are a college teacher in a traditional sense, but the reason we thought of you for Mavericks is because you are also a very successful composer, and I'd love to hear more about how you got into composing in the first place.
Sure. In undergrad, it was required of my major at Vanderbilt to do a introduction to composing course. So I had a semester of that, and I really liked it and kind of took it very seriously when I was in the class because I thought it was really, really neat. And then I ended up taking just a year of private lessons my senior year of undergrad and kind of just continued to do it slowly along the way. Whenever I talk to other oboists or other musicians, regardless of their age or level, most people are kind of terrified of composing. And, in some sense, we do it all the time. It's as simple as just kind of singing a song in your head that you're making up on the spot or whistling something or, the mood strikes you and you're belting something out in the shower. But it's amazing that people are kind of terrified to put pencil to paper, and especially at a very advanced level of playing, you are 100% capable of writing really terrific music, starting with kind of solo unaccompanied repertoire for what you play. I only play oboe and English horn and, the oboe family of stuff. I'm not a pianist. I'm a horrible pianist. I played saxophone in marching band and crash cymbals, but I'm not. Maybe, who knows? But, I really started, I took a little bit of break, actually, when I finished college, and I didn't really come back to it really until I started working at OU. A little bit along the way, a little bit here and there, but, a lot of us write our own cadenzas for things, so you do little composing along the way, right? You've got a Mozart concerto, or you've got something that you want to put your own stamp on. So I started to, as I was starting to teach, really students of all sorts of levels. When I started here, I had a doctoral student all the way down through entering freshman, and I had private lesson students who were brand new beginning, and, everyone kind of comes to music with different abilities and different kind of skills. And so I started kind of composing as a way to, write pieces of music for my students, because I wanted to, write a piece that would introduce them to either something rhythmically complex or even extended techniques. And, when you think of what's the first piece an oboist is going to learn with extended techniques, everyone says the Persichetti Parable. And it's a great piece, but there should be more than a single answer out there for, a way to kind of introduce an oboist to harmonics and multiphonics, and the Persichetti doesn't have actually a ton. There's a few little things here and there. But you're not going to have them, jump into some, insane, Denisov solo oboe piece that has crazy, 150 different multiphonic fingerings and all sorts of things, and it just would bog a student down who's learning it really for the first time. So I was kind of filling little gaps is kind of why I started composing. And it's not that those pieces don't exist. I just didn't know what's out there. And, you listen as much as you can listen, and you try to hunt down as many pieces as you can. But, you can only have someone play the second movement of the Cézanne Sonata so many times before you want something that's going to, introduce kind of free, flexible playing. I mean, there's other pieces, obviously. But I primarily started really to kind of fill gaps and holes in things that I saw were kind of in the market. And all of this is under the umbrella, I think, of it's an interesting thing when you're writing for your own instrument, because you know it intimately, and most composers are not oboists. There are plenty of composers who are, but most are not, and it, doesn't disclude, if that's a word, I think that's a word, composers from being wonderful writers for the oboe. But I do find that I come across pieces where a composer has kind of, insert goofy extended technique here. It takes you out of the actual music of the piece because it's more about the trick than the music. Mm-hmm. And so I find that sometimes it can be a little forced, a little non-idiomatic, where, it's a challenge, or sometimes it's, even too much of a challenge where it isn't always going to be that successful and, for most players kind of all the time. But that's really kind of primarily where I started. And I've, over the years of being at OU, this is going to be my 7th year coming up, I have very much gotten into making is maybe a light term, insisting and requiring as part of their grade that they compose, and we do a composition project every year. But at OU we have a sophomore barrier, which many schools have, which is kind of your halfway through your undergrad, and it's a larger jury at the end of the year. It's a 20-minute performance, and all of my students play an original component on that, and they'll play an original piece on their senior recital. And I think that's really, it ends up being, when they start, it's very, everyone's kind of terrified to write music for themselves. But really by the end, when you're writing a piece for your senior recital, it always ends up being the most meaningful piece and performance because your family is there and your friends are all there kind of supporting you. And it's a good space to kind of really to express yourself. And so, we do a lot of composing in the oboe studio at OU. And last year we did I usually try to come up with unusual inspirations for my students. Am I talking a lot? I am, right? This is a long answer. Is this too long? How long is this thing supposed to be?
No, you're fine.
Okay. Well, for sure, jump in if I'm just spinning my wheels here. Because I don't know. I feel like that's a really long answer.
Well, I have a question, actually, about
Sure.
incorporating it into your pedagogy, because I totally believe what you're saying about people being afraid to put pencil to paper and that type of thing. What type of benefits have you seen pedagogically in your students as in terms of bringing them outside of their comfort zone? And I wonder, does it help with things like performance anxiety or that type of thing, having this kind of confidence by tapping into that other part of themselves?
100%. And I think composing works for every student at every level. At the earliest stages, it's learning to figure out what rhythms you just played and what key am I in and what meter am I playing. And so at the very beginning stages, I even have, beginning oboe students where they only know a few notes. I'll have them kind of create little exercises where they play with just the rhythm of it. And it's like take a B flat or A right in the middle of the staff, and how creative can you get with rhythm? But what it ends up doing is you start to think about music in a totally different way. You're not reading symbols on a page and just kind of spitting them out. It's the opposite, where you kind of have to explore first, find what you love, and then you can kind of commit to putting it on the page. I think it helps with really everything, and I think it makes you a very, very consummate musician and player, and I think for very advanced people, it's learning to explore all the different things your instrument can do, from, blowing wind through the top of the horn without a reed-in, playing just the reed, key clicks, multiphonics that kind of your oboe and your reed setup let you do, and which ones they won't let you do. Not every oboe plays the same multiphonics, and, definitely reed styles affect the ease of certain extended techniques. But beyond all that is, I think it's kind of flexing your inspiration muscle. It's taking, your artistry to the gym. And you don't, so much of your pedagogy as you're a student is just doing what the book is telling you to do and what your teacher's telling you to do. So you have very little opportunity to, assert your own voice and point of view. And there's obviously shades of gray inside that where, you add your own kind of interpretation and artistry to certain pieces. But in an age where we live in, where every piece you can hear on Spotify or YouTube very quickly, you can kind of fall into a habit of just kind of going through the motions. And like insert crescendo here and make sure this note tapers beautifully. And every piece has to have that amount of control. But I think by actually requiring yourself to be inspired and to find things that you like and musically, and that's like, oh, that was a really cool melody, or I really like this kind of rhythmic thing here, or, you start to actually really, and it's what I say, it's flexing kind of your artistry muscle and inspiration. But it's a way to really find a circuitous way to love music. And I think we get so, it can be very taxing and kind of browbeating to be a musician and to be in musical training. So much of the response you get from your instrument and your own kind of critical ear is negative. It's, that note didn't speak easily, or I could have got louder here, or I played a wrong note, or that rhythm was wrong. So there's so much kind of negative feedback coming at you all the time. And it's nice to be able to sit down and play anything, and nothing can be wrong. You might prefer something over something else, but you can't make a wrong move when you're improvising on your instrument or singing. And I think there's something to be said for giving yourself some time every day to just be right, no matter what. Because it's very, oboe and double reeds are, they're snarly and they'll bark back at you really quickly. So it's a way to just kind of get away from the music and the music stand and just kind of do your own thing where, anything goes. So I think it's a good way to kind of, expand that way.
How did you, how quickly was your progress from writing etudes and small pieces for your students to use pedagogically to writing works for oboe and electronics or oboe and piano that are much more sophisticated and advanced, that are published, that are premiered at international conferences? How long did that take you, and what kind of work what was that like?
And I would like to add on to that, did you feel any nervousness when you made that transition?
It's interesting because when you live with a piece, like from the inside out, there is I'm a very nervous performer. I'm not I am a shaker and a quiverer and
oh my God, same.
So there's an immense amount of comfort and security blanket kind of wrapping yourself in a piece that you've written because you know it better than anybody's going to know it. And it's, there's a little bit of that safety where not everyone is bringing their own interpretation of the Mozart concerto to your performance, right, where everyone has played it their own way. So it's a way to I find it very comforting. Some people might not be as, at the start, you're kind of, you want to make sure you're not apologizing, and it's come up on your podcast before, but this whole imposter syndrome, right? Like, what am I doing? I'm playing a piece I wrote for flute, bass, and oboe and electronics. What am I? I'm, just some oboist from Chicago, and, why am I, why is my voice valid and that kind of thing? And, there was a great article. I don't know who wrote it, and I don't remember where it was, but it was kind of an article that took down the dangers of kind of the, I don't know how political we want to kind of get in the podcast, but it was taking down the dangers of kind of ivory towering the white male genius composer. And that over historically, that's what we've got, right? A lot of white male composers. And it's this kind of genius idolization. And it can, especially if you aren't a white male, it can kind of bleed over into facets of your playing where you might not feel worthy or valid. And that imposter syndrome is a really serious thing. And, it never really goes away. I think, we all experience that imposter syndrome at all stages in our career. And everyone's career morphs a little bit, and you start focusing on different things, and you find yourself in different places and doing different things. And I think that's what's exciting about a career in music, is you can really kind of carve it to your own lifestyle and what you like to do and love to do. And but with composing and presenting your own pieces and actually committing to writing music down, I find it gets a lot easier. And I see it not only with myself, but with my students, and they start to feel a little less imposter when they're writing pieces for themselves as they kind of go through it. And so, for a freshman coming in, they start their in the spring of their first year, and then they'll do it again the next year, and then they'll do it again their junior year, and they'll do it again their senior year. So really, by the end, they've written 4 serious works. And to kind of elaborate on the project that I asked my students to do, I give a talk kind of every year about that. music doesn't exist in a vacuum, and music doesn't exist inside a practice room. You know, everything you do and all the work you do is to bring everything to the human experience of music. So, you know, it's to collaborate with other musicians. It's to play for people. It's to play with people. It's to play, you know, it's to send pieces away to parts of the world and, you know, that kind of thing. So all the work you do is to be, at the end, a human being and connecting in very important, deep ways with other humans. And it's, you need to, I call it your inspiration well. And so I think everybody has their kind of inspiration or artistry well. And, you know, slogging through your scales and playing through your rep and that kind of thing starts to kind of take buckets of water out of that well. And you've got to do something that puts water back in that well. So for me, and I was kind of joking at the very beginning before we were even talking about, you know, got into any of the questions, but I love to garden. I love to cook. I love watching documentaries. And, you know, I think you've got to find things that are outside of music that inspire you. And you never know where that's going to be, and different things will inspire you in different ways, but things that make you happy. And you can't be making reads all day. You know, there are days you have to probably do it. But, you know, you've got to get away from the read desk and, you know, getting your major scales and minor scales and things like that up to whatever tempo. You know, they're going to be there tomorrow. And, you know, you've got to be a human being first, because really, and to be honest, with my own career, I find that there are so many amazing, wonderful talents out there that the way in which you connect with other people is as important as kind of your ability. You've got to meet the requirements and things, but I find that if you are someone people want to play with, if you're someone people want to work with, if you're someone people are, you know, okay saying, hey, let's go out for dinner after this concert, I think that's an incredibly important and often not discussed thing in music. This is all looping back to the project, and I'll get there for sure. But I think that you've got to be a person, and you've got to be a person that is, you know, you don't change your personality and things, but it's something you've got to find a way to be happy inside music. And it's very different for everybody. Not everyone finds the same joy. I actually love playing scales. And for me, I find it to be like very kind of soothing and like putting on old slippers, or, you know, I like to actually run through my scales, and I do that regularly. And I love that part of my practice routine. But not everyone loves that. So you've got to find a way to kind of find your happiness inside music. So all that being said, the project that I do with my students every year is I connect with a professor and a course that are outside of music. So this past year, we did a kind of side-by-side collaboration with the astrophysics department, and a professor was wonderful enough to kind of give us, come to studio class and give us kind of private lectures about theoretical sounds in the universe, right? So what the sound of a neutron star dying might sound like, and, you know, the effect on kind of time and space distortion and light and things like that. There's obviously no sound in space because it's a vacuum, and there's, you know, you need air for things to vibrate and things like that. But there are actual, like, NASA recreations of what sounds and things might sound like, and because they've done things in labs. And so there was actually audio to listen to, but it was really incredibly broad at the end, and I had students composing pieces about, I had a student who mapped out constellations on a staff and came up with melodies based on how constellations mapped out on a staff paper, which I thought was brilliant.
That is so creative.
So creative, and I never would have come up with that. And I had students do kind of like Greek mythologies based on the stars and kind of doing programmatic settings of those stories. I had a student do a piece about a black hole and the event horizon, which is the perimeter of a black hole, where on the outside of the perimeter you can still see things and but the black hole is continuously like sucking things in. But once you're no one knows what happens inside once you pass over the event horizon because everything ceases to be, you can't see in there. So things kind of theoretically vanish, although it's an infinity to vanish. It continues to vanish forever, or until the black hole explodes or does whatever it's supposed to do. So it was an amazing piece for oboe and bass ocarina, and that is not a typo. It was something that she had a beautiful glass bass ocarina from before, and something she had loved, and it was kind of like she did a really wonderful thing where the ocarina was representing kind of the mystery inside the black hole, and the oboe was kind of representing the outside the event horizon and and they converged, and then they interacted, and then the oboe kind of was sucked into the black hole and how it kind of interacted with the ocarina. But I find it's amazing to see students light up when someone brings in a bass ocarina and says, I want to write a piece for this. Okay, let's do it. Wait, what? Yeah, let's do it. What do you have in mind? So if students find their own kind of inspirations, and when the topic, I happen to think this one was the most successful because it was a very, very kind of ripe topic. There's so much to kind of draw from, which was really, really nice. And we were also incredibly fortunate enough, shout out to Jenny Brandon, we have Jenny Brandon, who's a wonderful composer in California, work with the students. And I thought it would be nice for, especially the folks who've done it with me for a bunch of years, to get just a new voice and a new kind of person kind of helping them through the foibles of composing and the process. And she talked to us about her own process of composing. And, everyone learns and does things differently. And it was very helpful for students who got a ton out of it. And the pieces were really great. And Jenny Brandon was incredible and amazing for basically donating her time to us and kind of Skyping into studio class and working with students individually over the phone. And it was really an unbelievable opportunity for myself and the students and to just kind of get better as musicians and for someone who really does it as a living. So this past year was astrophysics. The previous year was we teamed up with a graduate course in Spanish poetry. So what we did was I had the graduate students in the poetry class come to the School of Music, and we went to the recording studio, and I recorded them reading the poems, and then everyone got their own poem, and every one of the oboe students got their own, picked and was assigned their own poem. And then they took the reading of the poem and turned it into kind of an electronic soundscape. And people added all sorts of different sounds, and we ended up with an absolute cornucopia of options, and people turned it into, some presented the poem very straightforward, you could hear the text, others it was completely distorted, and we added all sorts of different sounds and things like that, and, in my kind of limited ability with, I don't own billion-dollar audio editing software. I use Audacity, which is free on the internet, on the interwebs. But great program for kind of editing audio, and it's very easy to use, and it's not complicated, and you can import all sorts of audio files, and you can create your own kind of electronic soundscape based on that. The year earlier than that, we did something with the art museum, and we talked about kind of what musical terms might be found inside paintings, like motion and vibrancy versus non-vibrancy and dynamics, and there's a ton of crossover there. It was a nice way to kind of translate terms we think about in music to art and vice versa, well, in visual arts, painting and sculpture, and kind of going backwards. But, yeah, it's very, I would say, pretty consistently the first year folks who are doing it. It could be a brand new master's student, a first year doctoral student, or a freshman, or someone who maybe transferred in or who added an oboe minor or something. It's scary at the beginning because you probably haven't done it, or you've done maybe very little. But it's as you kind of go through and as you start to say, okay, I like this, and wait, I'm actually playing this. I'm very happy with how I'm playing this piece, because you're so connected to it. It's almost impossible to not play it with a lot of meaning, and I don't have to, force fit my own dynamic interpretations of pieces onto a student. They can really bring their own vision, and from the very, very beginning. It's an amazing thing to see how people open up, and it really helps. I think it helps you fight that imposter syndrome because you start to. I'm also pretty insistent on. I'm not always the most hippy dippy person, but I am sometimes hippy dippy. But I am very steadfast and devoted to the fact that my oboe studio and the students inside the studio and my own office and in the read room and in the rehearsal halls and things is a place of love, support, and encouragement, and it is not a place for backbiting and competing by putting others down. I'm really happy and with how I've and it's a mark of the students, not me, but that we can really keep a place open for students to try things, for students to fail, and to get better and to make mistakes. Every mistake is worth making if you learn from it, and you've got to make mistakes because I think that not only helps you apply that process to other tricky things that are coming down the road, but it helps you as a teacher, and it helps you in the practice room and kind of enhancing your own critical ear as you're evaluating your own playing and things like that. But as students are free to express themselves through music and through writing a piece of music, I think it does help. I don't think, I know it helps students who may not have been very confident coming in start to find their feet kind of firmly planted on the ground, and asserting their own interpretations of new pieces that they, beyond the work that they compose for themselves. And that is what it's all about. It's a process for sure because it's a lot of time, and, you really end up kind of sitting in the practice room improvising and noodling around. But as a teacher, I'm very happy for that because you start to come across maybe different interval patterns that you haven't before, and the tuning strife that might come from, unusual leaps or things that you haven't really seen in your own music yet. And it's a win-win-win-win-win-win situation. It makes you a stronger musician. It makes you, I really find it helps students find confidence, and it helps you interpret rhythms. It helps you learn new things on the instrument. It helps you explore the instrument in new ways. It helps you troubleshoot. It helps you, it's just really a kind of a remarkable process. And I know for a fact that it's, on my, we get, as teachers at, universities, we get evaluations every semester. Every semester or in the spring in particular, I get, my favorite thing was the composition project, and I can't wait to do it next year and that kind of thing. It's always seems to be really, really, really successful. And now I'm kind of in the exciting stage of daydreaming about what is next. But I love connecting students with faculty and students that are not in our area, because going back to kind of working and interacting with other types of academics and other students and other fields, it really makes you, sometimes you have to hunt a little harder for inspiration and kind of finding the way in which you can connect music to astrophysics. It's not always an immediate connection, but I think it helps, humans be humans. It's also wonderfully fun for the other area. And for the most recent one we did, which was the astrophysics, we performed in the physics department, where we gave our concert of the pieces. And the director of astrophysics and physics said, "This is the coolest thing I've seen in 20 years, and you've got to do this again and concertize it, and can we make this into a lecture recital where I have faculty coming and talking about the topics that your students picked, so, maybe a little more information on a black hole or kind of how time and space distort when it's bending around a planet, or, and so it inspires other sides too, and I think it's a really interesting thing to see non-musicians get fired up about music and their own topics and fields through music. So it's a great kind of, selfishly, I think it's also a great way for keeping kind of classical music alive and bringing it to people who don't normally hear it, and creating new audiences. And that's really what, is kind of the axe to grind or cross to bear of kind of the 21st century musician, which is we have to kind of create audiences that are maybe aging out, right? It's not the same blue-haired ladies concert hall. It's a different you've got to kind of generate your own opportunities. And sometimes that's calling up an astrophysics professor out of the blue and saying, "Hi, I'm Dan. I have a super weird idea, but go with me on it. And take you out for coffee." And, I've never not had anyone everyone seems to be very excited about it. Like, "Oh yeah, let's do that." So it's, it works out kind of really, really well for both sides. And my first thing I tell kind of the faculty that I pair up with outside of music is, no matter what I want to do, I don't want this to be a waste of your time or just a drain on your resource of time. I want this to work for you, and how can we make it, so it's performing in their classrooms, it's, getting unique kind of opportunities where you can pair the students up, things like that, where it's more than just kind of I can come talk for, 20 minutes to your kids. It's not, I try to make it meaningful for both sides, and it's easy to do. It's not hard to make it. Music is a great field and foundation for everybody. Everyone experiences music, no matter kind of what they are studying or where they came from or that kind of thing. So
that is so awesome. I wish I were your student.
See, I don't, because I'm sitting here going, I'd be like, the Big Dipper? I don't know. But I'm like, all the stuff you're saying is really intimidating.
I mean, it really is, it's super daunting if you have, and it's not let's write a 15-minute piece. And I guess that was the original question, which was, how did I get into writing larger scale works? I never really answered that, did I?
Well, I completely, in wanting to piggyback on it, I completely hijacked it. So, yeah, I'd love if you did touch on Galit's original question. Sorry about that.
No, totally. But, it's daunting to, the pieces that come out of this kind of semester project that I do in the spring really range around kind of 3 to 5 minutes, which is brilliant. And there are wonderful pieces that are 3 to 5 minutes long. I'm pretty sure Webern's entire output fits into 3 to 5 minutes long. So kind of how did I morph from kind of writing etudes and smaller scale works to kind of larger, finger quoting, more serious kind of recital hall works, right? It really kind of just, you have to start somewhere, right? And before I get too far away, I also want to say that really every musician, especially instruments that existed in Baroque music, you need to compose because you need to ornament Baroque music. And then as you get into kind of classical music and you're adding your own cadenzas and things like that, there are definitely areas in which you'll have to compose a little bit. So, Jackie, I know you're kind of saying, oh, my God, how do I take the Big Dipper and write into a piece? But I'm sure you've, done Baroque ornamentation and things like that. So you've done composing. You've done all that kind of stuff. And all it is just kind of extrapolating an ornament and just kind of going off and just kind of noodling around and seeing kind of what you love. I've been really lucky that I've gotten to play recitals of all my own music twice at IDRS in the past few years. I did a recital in Tokyo of two pieces I wrote. My first published work was an oboe sonata, and I played that there. And then I had done another piece that was wordless kind of settings of poems, which is just called Songs Without Words, but not to steal from Mendelssohn or other composers who have that exact title. But it was kind of a wordless setting of poems, which was kind of my own inspiration from poetry. But and then this most recent summer in Lawrence, in Wisconsin, I did 2 electronic works. And I did a piece for oboe and electronics, and I did a piece for English horn and electronics. So I've been really lucky that I get to kind of play these pieces at venues and things where everyone's drinking the Kool-Aid a little bit, right? It's everyone's kind of in on it and like ready for like new things and like, okay, what do we got here? It's like it's going to a buffet. You get to try a little bit of everything at IDRS, and so really, again, not to kind of repeat myself, but this whole kind of composing for students eventually grew into a need and desire for me to be able to have music that's portable when I go, because I'm lucky enough that people will have me in to give master classes or even master classes and recitals at other universities and giving little recitals, around the country or even, around the world, luckily enough. So there are times where you'll get, a 30-minute rehearsal with the pianist right before you give the recital. And you can't do the entire Strauss concerto and then the Poulenc sonata and then, the Marcel Biche French suite. You've got to find a way to kind of fill out your recitals in a way where you can prepare a lot of it on your own. So I started it all began maybe 7 years ago where I said, okay, I want to start figuring out if I can give recitals where I don't need a piano. Because I think it certainly limits where you can play, right? You can't just roll a Steinway out into the middle of a field somewhere and give a Picnic Under the Stars recital. You can bring a keyboard, and there's certainly other ways around that. But so I said, okay, so what can I do? And then I started looking at all my unaccompanied repertoire, just solo oboe and English horn. And I said, okay, this is great. And then after about 25 minutes of playing solo oboe repertoire, my face was falling off because it's just you. So there's, the amount of rests you can put in those kinds of pieces are, it's minimal at best, unless you kind of throw in some John Cage or, where you're sitting there for 33 seconds. But so that's kind of how I started, certainly with electronic music, because that is and that was the recital I gave at IDRS this summer, which was kind of my showing the world. There's great pieces for electronics and instruments and things, and there's wonderful live electronics where there's a mixing board and an audio engineer who's looping you and capturing you, and those pieces are incredible and they're amazing. But they're not always feasible, right? When someone says, hey, can you come play for my students, and it's 2 days away and you can't get that kind of thing. So I wanted to start writing pieces that would let my mouth take a little bit of a break, and because as double reed players, we have to think about those sorts of things as we're making programs. So that was really how electronic music kind of came into being. And, well, not in the world, but for me, and how I started approaching it. And the recital I gave at IDRS was really I'm playing on a $30 speaker that I bought online, and I'm running it from my phone to the speaker, Bluetooth or wired, auxiliary kind of jack or whatever you want to do, which is incredibly simple. And you can have really successful concerts with just you and a little speaker. It doesn't have to be, I've given concerts that have started an hour and a half late because the speakers weren't working, or the chords that you were running, the outlets weren't where they needed to be. But without needing, having a little portable speaker that can play incredibly loud, and, has 30 hours of battery life before it runs out and things like, obviously there's only so much you can do to protect yourself against electronic glitches. But I find that the less outlets and chords you need, the better, in terms of this is going to work for sure, guaranteed every time. But my journey kind of from starting to compose to writing more kind of recital-length pieces was really just because I fell in love with it more and more as I started doing it. I'm 100% in an age where having computer software and composing software not help you, but you get to hear it, is a huge advantage for me as a non-pianist. I can't, I'm fairly certain I wouldn't be able to do this without, my computer playing back what I just typed in. And there's a fair amount of, I'm bringing my own thoughts that I have in my head to the computer, but sometimes I'm like, let me see what the piano does if I change this or something like that, but I wouldn't be able to play it on piano. So that substantially helps me, but a lot of my pieces come out of specific events that I'm doing. So I mentioned earlier that I have a piece for flute, oboe, double bass, and electronics. And that's because a few years ago I did a trio faculty recital at OU for flute, oboe, and double bass. And there are not a lot of pieces, as in none, that exist for that instrumentation. Mm-hmm. There are probably some out there, but we didn't find any. So the bass professor wrote a piece for us, and I wrote a piece for us. So it was a kind of 12-minute piece for trio and electronics. And it mainly, I started to really love playing original pieces. And I try to kind of do it on every recital I give. And so every time I play a recital or I'm playing at an event, I was really, really fortunate enough. At the end of this past school year, I hosted a benefit concert for kind of the international students on OU's campus. As kind of traveling was getting harder to do and scarier to do for students going back to certain countries, we had a lot of students that were trapped on campus and are legally not allowed to work. So grocery money and simple amenities were going to be a commodity. So I kind of called up the International Studies Department, teamed up with the dean, and we hosted a really, really wonderful benefit concert and raised a really awesome amount of money. And, I wish it was more. Obviously you always wish it could be more, but I wrote a piece kind of for that event for oboe and piano just because I wanted to turn it into a commission project that can raise money. So I kind of put it out on Facebook and sent it out to oboists or any other instrument and said, I'm happy to transpose this. If you want the piece, I'll send it to you. If you want to just put your name in the piece, $20, trying to keep it, so a lot of people can participate. And it generated a really serious amount of money, with all of which went to the benefit concert. And I love getting to do that. So for me, it's, I'm not going to retire from oboe playing because I'm such a successful composer. Monetarily, that's for dang sure. But there's a lot of good pride in putting an original piece out there, and especially if you're really happy with it, and But if you're not, you don't have to play it, and you can, usually there aren't a lot of deadlines for me. I'm not, in demand as kind of a big commission or anything like. I'm not, and by not usually I mean never. I've never been like that. So I'm primarily just writing works for myself to play, and I know Galit is humoring me, and I think going to play the English horn and electronics piece.
I'm so excited to play that.
It's a fun, it's fun, and there are not a lot of pieces, frankly, for oboe and electronics that are available. You hear them recorded, but not all those pieces are published.
Mm-hmm.
So unless you find a way to track people down that are still living and that have the music still, it's not a huge, there's a lot, but it's not a hugely accessible field. And I do think it's making a comeback. I know some composers kind of think of it as a little bit of an outdated medium, but it's not, and I think it's coming back kind of like gangbusters, because I see it a lot more now, where you kind of see, especially with oboe, that there's not a lot of, and I think saxophone had a lot to do with kind of a lot of solo rep, and the amount of things the saxophone can do is incredible in relation to dynamically speaking and all sorts of technical things. So a lot of composers, when they want to do kind of that, quote, kooky, crazy, virtuosic, whatever piece, oboe isn't always the first on their list of who they want to, write for. And,
I wonder why.
well, and it's, you get in, it's like, and the open, an oboist is like, nah, I'm not going to do that, or, nah.
We have the range of like 4 notes.
Right, and like the dynamic range of like half of a clarinet, and it was really sad, and it all this kind of started from I did with the electronic music faculty at OU. I did a international call for submissions for pieces for oboe and electronics, and for the students to play. This was totally unrelated to any kind of our own composition. This was a different project, and it was just a fun way to kind of see kind of what was out there, and it was free for the composers to send it in. It wasn't like didn't generate any money or anything. But I would say 90% of the pieces we got were written for other instruments and transposed to oboe for that call for submissions. So you could tell because the recordings they sent in were bass clarinet or saxophone, or there were like oopsies, I left wrong markings in the score, and it's like saxophone inserts mute or inserts whatever into whatever. So it was kind of like, you could tell pretty easily that most of these submissions were not written for the oboe. And there's something to be said for works that are conceived with that instrument in mind. I think, a lot of things transfer and it's great, but, there's certain things that are idiomatic to instruments that aren't to others, and, I think I was a little bit, crestfallen that it wasn't, more kind of pieces written specifically for oboe. Mm-hmm. But that being said, I just kind of started writing my own and playing them and getting to kind of play them all sorts of places. But looping really far back, I didn't find it, I think like anything else, it's a skill, and you start to explore. And so when you're writing smaller pieces, you're mostly dealing with kind of melody and, harmony to whatever extent you're kind of thinking about it and using it. But then as you start writing larger scale, kind of more, quote, serious works, you start having to kind of experiment with newer things, form, and kind of development, and instrument stamina and things like that. And there's a lot of you start to tackle a new set of challenges, which is very exciting. And I'm just kind of now finishing up a concerto for oboe and strings, which is about 19 minutes long. I'm really, really happy with it. But what's great about, the world we live in is I don't play violin or cello, but I never, ever am afraid to ask for help. And I think that's something musicians should never be cautious to do. If you don't understand how to do something or you want help, ask. Everyone's willing to help you. So, hey, can I bake you a thing of gluten-free brownies, and will you look over my string parts and see, is this super crazy? What would I change? What do I need to change? That double stop doesn't work, or that, there's not enough time to put a mute in or to switch to pizzicato there. So you get a lot of help for, because I'm basically making up for a complete lack of composition education. Because I never had a ton, you're in your orchestration class or in your conducting class, you learn the ranges of the instruments and you learn, where their kind of tessitura sits and things like that. But, just by being in an orchestra or a band or, and going through school, you learn a lot of that stuff just kind of by being around it. But, it's, there are certain things that are kind of like, okay, this doesn't work great for this. Maybe you want to kind of swap that out for something else or things like that. But it really is, you just get better and better as you write. And it's not harder to write a larger scale work than it is to write a smaller scale work. And I genuinely think, and this is going to sound so pretentious and snotty and stupid, but sometimes you're writing a piece and you it's not going to be a long, like, that piece isn't suited for a large-scale work. It's maybe a small piece. And, maybe you could expand it and force it. But as you're kind of composing it, you find yourself being like, I'm happy with this. And that's kind of where this piece is speaking to me, right? It's like, oh, this feels right. This is what the notes saying to me. That's where I'm going with pretentious. But, it's like you're watching, like, a Project Runway or something, and, like, the person, like, throws fabric on the dress form, and it's like, I want the fabric to speak to me, and it's, like, wrapping it, and it's like, that's it. I don't know why they're all, like, weird, like, old British ladies or whatever accent. But, sometimes that piece is not built to be 25 minutes long. And sometimes it is, and you're writing and you're like, this is definitely the first movement of something. And you can kind of keep going. So it's the more, I genuinely think the more you do it, the more you kind of are in tune with it. And just like anything, you get better and better and more comfortable with kind of whatever you're going to do. And getting, to dupe friends and colleagues into playing that music, you get good feedback on, kind of what, I'm always happy for someone to say, this wasn't quite like a great flute part or something. I'm, not in no one's ever kind of said anything like that, but it's good to get, especially when it's your piece and you can make changes. It's wonderful. There's a great amount of flexibility and fluidity in playing a world premiere that you're writing, because you can really kind of like workshop it, and play it in the earlier stages, and as you're polishing it up, you can kind of tinker with things and that kind of thing. So it gets easier as you do more, and it certainly gets easier when you have great friends and peers and colleagues who are willing to kind of, play your piece. And you get all sorts of, because I'm curious, Galit, when you play the electronic piece, I know, it's for like English horn and electronics, and I made the tape, so I know where every little tick and swell and things are in the tape. But when, as a composer, how do you get someone else through that is incredibly valuable and helpful for me to add. And then maybe I need a time cue here, or could you put a cue in of this, or things like that. Because it clicked when I heard that there was a kind of bass drum rumble here, and then I knew to come in, or things like that. So, you try to construct the piece in a way that you hope it's played in a similar way. Obviously, there's going to be a lot of flexibility in a piece with electronics, but you can't head off every error at the onset. So it's good to, troubleshoot and get good feedback kind of as you're composing. But I think from going from smaller works to larger works was really just, going to the composition gym and doing some hot yoga. There, I don't know what's hip these days. CrossFit.
Dan, this has been such an inspiring and wonderful conversation. Thank you so much for joining us on the Mavericks series.
Thank you for having me. This was, I can ramble, and so I hope anyone got anything from it, and it was a blast. And thank you guys for doing this and bringing different perspectives and different players and different voices in the industry to people, anyone who's willing to just click on a link. And that's an amazing gift for people who don't have access to, a lot of those resources, and a lot of, there are places where there aren't oboe teachers, and someone just found an oboe somewhere and is learning kind of through the internet and YouTube. So it's an amazing thing. So thank you guys for doing this.
Thank you so much.